or the no objection for the pilot countries to facilitate immediate submission of the Big Club Readiness Project to the Green Climate Financing for approval and execution. We are talking about implementation, and we do not have time to deliberate in terms of not making it clear that our action plans are known. We have already had several resolutions. What is needed now is call to action, complete implementation of the resolutions we have agreed, and I'm sure there will be serious resolutions here in terms of funding, in terms of the approach, in terms of the attitude. We must push our partners to open the pass. And you already know that the President of the Republic of Kenya is a champion in this area. His position on change of the architecture of financing is something that Africa must continue to engage with and push so that it happens earlier than later. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Cabinet Secretary. As the Cabinet Secretary said, 50%, the world is urbanizing very rapidly. 50% of the global community is expected to be living in urban areas. Africa is the fastest urbanizing continent, with 60% of our population by 2050 expected to be in urban centers. So building resilience for urban populations is really a very critical thing. And we thank the partnership with UN Habitat, with United Cities and local government, and all other partners. Allow me now, Your Excellency, to invite the Cabinet Secretary who is going to lead the ministerial discussions for Africa, given that Kenya is the chair of the negotiation team, and our Cabinet Secretary will be the lead minister leading the discussions on negotiations. The Honorable Cabinet Secretary for Environment, Climate Change and Forestry. You have the floor, sir.
The Right Honorable Raila Odinga, former Prime Minister of the Republic of Kenya, my colleague Honorable John Bandi from the National Treasury, Honorable Ali Sohome, our Minister for Plans, Public Works, Housing and Urban Development, the Ambassador of Azerbaijan will be our host. His government will host us in COP29. Distinguished guests, partners, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I want to begin by expressing my appreciation to my esteemed colleagues for organizing this very, very important meeting, and to the Right Honorable Raila Odinga for his presence today. His role as our candidate for the African Union chairperson and his experience as a former special envoy for infrastructure development in Africa are very invaluable and very dear to us. And because I have an opportunity here, let me say it. 16 years ago, myself, the Honorable John Bandi, the current president, served in his government where he was the Prime Minister. The current president was the Minister for Agriculture. My friend, me and Honorable Badi were deputy ministers busy answering questions in those days. So we know our candidate. We know his experience. We know his capabilities. We are presenting a tested, experienced African statesman, a Pan-Africanist to the continent. And we are very proud that today you have joined us, Your Excellency. I also want to extend my appreciation to the African Union Commission, United Cities and Local Governments of Africa, the 14 national focal points of the Building Resilience for Urban Poor, the African Designated Authorities Network, AFDEN, and all our supporting partners. Your collaboration in addressing the climate change challenge affecting our most vulnerable population in both the rural and urban areas is critical, crucial, and important for us today. This meeting is not just timely, it is urgent. And why do I say so? We have witnessed catastrophic floods globally and with severe repercussions in Kenya and other vulnerable regions of Africa. Coming home, the recent floods in Kenya resulted in over 300 deaths, displaced more than 400,000 people, destroyed thousands of homes, and damaged our very critical national infrastructure, including roads and bridges. The destruction of livestock and farmland further exhibits the crisis we are talking about. And before these floods, Kenya endured one of the worst droughts in its history, displacing over 256,000 people and leaving 4.4 million people facing very severe food insecurity. All these combined impacts of floods and droughts have costed Kenya at least 5% of our GDP. And the effects of the poorest segments of our population, which are found both in the rural and in the urban, is very devastating. In Nairobi city, for example, 72% of our population were affected by the floods, with 54% of their livelihood and households completely displaced. The urban poor, who make about 60% of our population and reside in informal settlements and flood-prone areas, are shouldering the heaviest burden of climate change. While the government is actively mobilizing resources to recover from these recent floods, it is clear that we need to do much more to address the dire consequences of this climate change. According to the recent UN Habitat report, if current urbanization rates continue, approximately, which is 50% of Kenyans now will live in urban areas by 2030, another UN report predicts that by 2050, 60% of Africa's population will reside in cities and towns. With a high rate of migration from rural to urban areas, our largest cities ultimately will be increasing and increasingly be located in developing countries. This will exhibit the spread of informal settlements and intensify the threats posed by climate change. And it's imperative that, faced with this, we tackle climate change with the urgency it requires, and we must resolve. At the continental level, adaptation remains our top priority. And as the current chair of the Committee of African Heads of State on Climate, that is Kenya, our President Ruto, and the chair of the African Group of Negotiators led by our Special Envoy on Climate Change, Ambassador Ali Mohammed, we are committed to making adaptation a key, important focus in all our multilateral processes as a country. To confront climate change challenges, Kenya hosted the first ever Africa Climate Summit and adopted the Nairobi Declaration, which will guide our continent climate action. Notably, Kenya has enacted several legal and policy measures to address climate change. We have one of the most robust climate acts. My ministry is currently spearheading the 15 billion tree growing strategy to safeguard our catchment areas and enhance resilience, alongside other pivotal initiatives that promote climate action through carbon markets. In the last 8 months, we have planted over 400 million trees, and we keep on planting them. We are also integrating climate change considerations across all sectors of our economy, in alignment with the bottom-up economic transformation agenda known as BETTER of our fifth administration. I am proud of the two Kenyan-led initiatives that will be discussed here today, the BICRAP and the FLOCA. These programs aim to develop and implement infrastructure and social programs in order to build resilience among our most vulnerable populations, including children, the elderly, women, and the people with a disability, as committed in the Nairobi Declaration. Both programs are part of the National Climate Action Plan, FLOCA, and in particular has successfully mobilized financing at both the community level through our county governments. This pioneering program success must be expanded across the continent and to our urban centers. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, the launch of Backup by the UN Secretary General in 2019 and its implementation plan by President William Ruto at the African Climate Summit marks a significant step forward in our deliberation. Now, 5 years on, we must advance its implementation. And I want to commend Honorable Alice Ohome and the Executive Secretary of the United Cities and Local Governments of Africa for their leadership in mobilizing resources for backup in the 14 African countries. The successful implementation of this program requires a united effort. Governments, NGOs, civil society, the private sector, international agencies must come together to provide the necessary funding, expertise, and resources to elevate it to the level of FLOCA. And I'm very hopeful that Backup Kenya will address critical challenges such as housing, water, infrastructure, including even accelerating our affordable housing and slum upgrading program, and supporting the Nairobi River Commission in its cleanup efforts. Your Excellency, former Prime Minister, I want to assure you that I will take the route of the late John Michuki. I will clean Nairobi River Commission. I will take the route of Wangari Maathai in saving Karura Forest today, that you will enjoy. So the 141 industry players and many people who we have done through traceability and who are polluting the rivers, Nairobi rivers, you better think twice. There's a new sheriff in town. I will deal with it. We must see the blue waters of these rivers, all the way from Kikuyu to the end of the eastern part of Nairobi. Nairobi, Your Excellency, former Prime Minister, is the environmental capital of the world. That's why we have UNEP here. And because you spearheaded our constitutional making of 2010, Kenyan constitution is a green constitution. From the preamble, the fourth of the preamble, to many articles, they talk about how environment is our heritage. We must preserve it, we must protect it for now and for the future generation. So I'm going to implement the green constitution of 2010. I'm going to implement what our forefathers, key leaders like Wangari Maathai did for our country. As I conclude, I urge the 14 bankrupt county representatives and AFDAN as the Green Climate Fund, the focal point to finalize the modalities for implementing the GCF readiness, support to scale up FLOCA, and mobilize resources for backup and other resilience building projects. I trust this meeting will produce a clear investment pipelines, both for initiatives which are suitable for presentation under the African Climate Summit Nairobi Declaration Framework. I urge AFDAN to identify and address the barriers to investment in adaptation and the slow rate of disbursement and access, particularly from GCF and other global funds. Present these outcomes for consideration at the AMKEN meeting of the environment ministers that will be held in Abidjan next week, and in all other continental forums that all of us together, our ministers, our technical people, our PSS will be attending. So I call on AFDAN to support similar national and continental initiative to ensure no one is left behind. I wish you all productive discussion. May God bless you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Cabinet Secretary As you observed, adaptation is priority for the continent. And as you noted, Kenya spends 5% of our GDP. In fact, UNECA, UN Economic Commission for Africa, figures indicate Africa spends 5 to 9% of our GDP to address adaptation issues, relocating our budget from development to responding to impacts of climate change. Allow me now to invite His Excellency the Cabinet Secretary for National Treasury and Economic Planning. As we all know, and as I said earlier, climate finance will be a pivotal issue, a central issue in COP29. His Excellency President William Ruto is the leader of international financial reform agenda, and debt issue is a big discussion at COP29 and the UN General Assembly. And nobody is better to lead us in that discussion than our Minister, our Cabinet Secretary for National Treasury. You have the floor, Your Excellency. And may I also ask you to invite His Excellency, the Right Honorable Prime Minister.
Thank you. Thank you, Ali. Good morning. I have a problem with my voice, but I hope today it will cooperate. Right Honorable Raila Odinga, former Prime Minister of the Republic of Kenya, the Honorable Adan Bare Duale, Cabinet Secretary for Environment, Climate Change and Forestry, and the Honorable Alice Wahome, Cabinet Secretary for Lands, Public Works, Housing and Urban Development. I'm told Professor Ibrahim, who is the Assistant Minister, Technical Affairs, Ministry of Housing, Utilities and Urban Communities of the Arab Republic of Egypt, has also joined us virtually. I want to also recognize Ambassador Sultan, who is going to be our host soon, my sister from Eswatini, and all distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning once again. Let me start by saying that I'm happy to be part of this important event where the continent of Africa has joined hands to address a global challenge which we are all aware of, the climate change, which is directly impacting on our lives and more pronounced among the poor, women and children. I wish to take also this opportunity to welcome you all to Nairobi for this important event. Thank you for honoring our invitation. We are gathered here today because of the significant role that the collaborations and partnerships in our countries play in accelerating climate financing needed to deliver on the goals of the Paris Agreement and drive sustainable, inclusive, and resilient development and growth. As we are all aware, climate change continues to present a major threat to the long-term growth and prosperity, with adverse impacts on the fiscal sustainability and economic well-being, especially for developing countries like ours in Africa with limited financial resources. So apart from the direct impact and effects of the climate change, it's also putting a serious strain on our purse and our budgets. And as Honorable Duale has just mentioned, and the others before, that we spend a huge chunk of our budgetary provisions in trying to mitigate and address the impact of climate change. And so it is important to address it before, so that we don't end up at the point where now we have to spend so much money to mitigate the same. The impact of climate change and its related response actions have direct effect on our fiscal position by lowering revenues and increasing public spending, and hence a lower envelope of public investment and public goods provision. As climate-filled risks intensifies, losses and damages due to insufficient adaptation responses and a sinkhole of financial protection are a fast emerging major macroeconomic concern for climate vulnerable economies like ours. Despite significant progress in several fronts, the international climate finance and funding commitments have fallen well short of what is required by the African countries to address the climate crisis. Ladies and gentlemen, I am cognizant of the many efforts in the past geared towards improving adaptive capacity and building resilience at global, regional, and national arenas. However, I must admit that the impacts of these efforts are yet to be fully realized due to limited climate financial flows emanating from inadequate technical capacity to develop bankable proposals amid a complex and rigorous climate finance access requirements and procedures. Our people from across the continent are today more deprived in both economic and social realms due to adverse impacts of climate change and disasters which have increased in frequency and scale not only in the recent past but also at present, threatening environmental sustainability and ecological balance. I am fully aware that African Green Climate Finance's National Designated Authorities Network, which is abbreviated as AFDAN, is already recognized by the Committee of the African Heads of States and Governments on Climate Change, giving the right leverage to undertake its role in finding the African solution in terms of the much needed means of implementation, with key focus on access to climate finance and technology as we shift away from capacity building to capacity strengthening for a low carbon and climate resilient development pathway. If you follow my speech, a little bit different from Honorable Duale's and Alice Wahome, is heavily on finances, and you'd understand why. Your Excellency, as a National Treasury, I am also looking at the off-budget, off-balance sheet financing, and I am really focusing on the financial aspect as my colleagues deal with the technical aspect of dealing with climate change. AFDAN platform is therefore considered as a strategic platform for African countries that strengthen advocates for increased, predictable, and sustainable climate finance for adaptation and mitigation by strengthening south to north cooperation and promoting African-led solutions for climate change. As such, it is our collective responsibility to be part and parcel of this noble movement. AFDAN is intended to address financing challenges by promoting African countries to accelerate the political will and regulatory efforts that will allow them to mobilize climate and green finance at scale, promoting cross-country learning and creating a tangible commitment for green growth. I am confident that AFDAN will enable continent to build consensus, articulate priorities, and share learning and best practices on climate finance solutions developed in unique African contexts. It is an African solution to African challenges. I don't want to call it African problems, African challenges. As I have already flagged out, addressing the adaptation and resilience measures at the local level is at the heart of our conversations and policy discussions. Our attention is drawn to two key programs which resonates with the African needs, notably financing locally led climate actions, popularly known as FLOCA, and building climate resilience of urban poor, the BICRAP that Honorable Alice Wahome talked a lot about, at both the rural and urban levels. I'm told we are doing fairly well or averagely well in rural areas, but at the urban level we are doing so poorly as a country and probably as a continent. Kenya has established the FLOCA program that seeks to build climate resilience of communities within the 47 counties of Kenya. Actually, we received funding which we have already disbursed to the counties to implement various activities that are supposed to help in mitigating on climate change. These are the initiatives that we need to implore upon to ensure that Africa is prioritizing locally led solutions to its challenges on climate change. I urge our fellow African countries to benchmark with Kenya on FLOCA and scale it up with even better structures for building climate resilience for their people. The other program on BICRAP provides hope for millions of African urban residents, as the glaring statistics notes that majority of the African countries have about, and as Honorable Dwale again said, 60% of their population as urban residents, categorized under the urban poor, who live in poor neighborhoods. So if we will have 50% of our population in urban areas and you have 60% of them poor, then that is 30% of the population of a country, and suffer the greatest consequences of the climate induced calamities. All this require financing to build resilience and enhance their adaptive capacity. Kenya has achieved significant milestone in climate change and climate finance by putting in place the relevant legal and institutional frameworks, including the Climate Change Act of 2016, National Climate Finance Policy, Sovereign Green Bond Framework, National Green Fiscal Incentive Policy Framework, among others. But despite all these efforts, we are still grappling with climate change impacts. In the last 1.5 years, Kenya has experienced abnormally heavy rains within 2 seasons that negatively impacted on lives of many Kenyans. I consider the inhibiting factor as limited access to climate finance that should support practicable, locally led solutions. Call to action. As I make this clarion call today, as a continent, we must come out strongly, united and driven by one key agenda of formation and operationalization of AFDAN to enhance our access to climate finance. This is something that we cannot do individually as nations. We must come together as a continent and insist in enhancing climate change financing. If anything, we are not the polluters of the environment. We know where the polluters reside. It is my sincere wish that this important meeting will also come out with a declaration that will shape up the agenda of the upcoming 10th special session of APCEN to be held in September 2024 in Abidjan, Cote d'Ivoire. United Nations General Assembly, which will take place in New York, and COP29 to be held in Azerbaijan, among other regional and global forums. As I conclude, Your Excellency, allow me also to mention something about you, which my colleagues have said, but just as a matter of emphasis. Honorable Dwale and I have worked with you very closely. I've actually worked with you more closely than anyone else, and I continue to still work with you because I'm still a member, very strong member of your party, which you lead. I hope I will soon join the Council of Elders of that party, having resigned from the position of the national chairman. I know your position and stand on environmental issues. If there is anyone Africa needs to champion as a champion of issues of climate change, then that person is none other than Right Honorable Raila Odinga. There, I am sure we can't go wrong. Your history is documented. We know how you fought very hard in terms of conservation of even our forests and water catchment areas, Mau forests and other forests across the country. And so we would not go wrong by having you at the African Union. You will be an advocate and a champion for protection of our environment, and that will go a long way in helping mitigating the climate change. Ladies and gentlemen, it is now my pleasure to invite the Right Honorable Raila Odinga. Let's put our hands together and welcome the Right Honorable Raila Odinga to the stage. Thank you, Excellency.
You may be seated. Honorable Ministers, the Special Envoy, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Yes, I want to say that I'm very delighted to have been invited to come here. but I don't know why I was invited. I think it's because, I'm a candidate for the AU chairmanship. And somebody just decided that probably this is a good platform for me to come and share with you people some of my ideas about this issue of climate change. But I'm happy to see an array of delegates who have come from different parts of the continent to our country, Kenya. As you know, they say that this is the cradle of mankind. They're saying that the oldest species of humanoid, the Turkana boy, found here in Kenya. So I just want to say welcome back home. Well, we are talking about climate change, and we just like a stuck gramophone. We go down and round because it's the same language we speak year in, year out. But maybe that is a subject for later. For now, I just want to say that it's my pleasure to be part of this great and noble occasion where Africa sits with partners through the platform of African Green Climate Finances, designated National Authorities Network, to discuss climate change and how to respond through accelerated access to climate change, climate finance. We are here to exchange ideas on a common problem, the view to develop a common approach and a common solution. I take note that AFDAN has been established to enhance mobility of climate finance, make it more readily accessible to support Africa in enhancing adaptive capacity and building resilience of our people, both in the rural and urban setups, through locally led solutions. I'm aware that AFDAN is already recognized by the Committee of African Heads of States and the government on climate change. This gives it the right leverage to undertake its role. Climate finance has been here with us, but access to the finances remains one of the biggest challenges in responding to climate change. I said that will sound like a stuck gramophone record. Because as you know, I was in COP15 in Copenhagen. I was in COP16 in Cancun, in Mexico. I was in Maputo. I was in Paris. Two years ago, I was in Sharm el-Sheikh. From COP15, from Copenhagen to Sharm el-Sheikh, it was the same language. Year in, year out. You go all the time going there to whine, to cry. This is why I was saying that you sound like a stuck gramophone record. The more the things change, the more they remain the same. The continent continues to face some areas of challenges associated with adverse climate change effects. Consequently, the vulnerable segments of our population, particularly the poor in both rural and urban communities, continue to bear the brunt of climate change. As already been said here, that Africa is a victim, not the offender, in this exercise. Africa's emissions is negligible compared to what we are going through globally. Yet you can see that today Africa lives between two twin disasters here. Floods and drought. Year in, year out. This year, this country suffered very severe floods. A lot of infrastructure destroyed. Many people displaced. Up to now, people are still suffering from the consequences of just recent floods. Down there, as we was going through floods here, down the south, there was the drought. They are going through a very severe drought in the south. And this happens across all the continent, year in, year out. So we are victims, yet the offenders themselves keep on using language. They come and use nice language, but that's all it is. The resolutions are passed, they just ignore. So we need to find a way of forcing implementation of resolutions which are passed. Which means that one such fundamental issue is the promise by the rich countries to play their part and help the countries that contribute the least in greenhouse gas emissions into adaptation. Because of the failure to translate the promises into reality, Africa as a continent still has challenges with access to some of the climate finance sources, such as the Green Climate Fund, Global Environment Facility, Least Developing Countries Fund, Adaptation Fund, Climate Investment Funds, as well as the bilateral and multilateral development partners, which are all well-established avenues for accessing climate finance. Consequently, Africa can only access 4% of the climate finances, which is way below the impactful finance. With the rapid urbanization of our continent and the development trajectory, Africa has an opportunity to chart its own pathways, which will ensure that African cities adapt to climate challenges. Because Africa is urbanizing fairly rapidly now. But urbanization is a global phenomenon. Even in Europe, urbanized. European society was also fairly rural. Through after the Industrial Revolution, that rural and urban migration started. And it was not forced. It came gradually. But eventually they planned it and they managed to manage their cities well. Here, at independence, new leadership in the continent was completely ignorant of what was going to happen. Immediately after independence in this country, there was rural-urban migration in the 60s. People were coming to the cities. But then the government at that time asked people to go back to land. There was an order by the head of state then that people go back to the land. Rudi mashambani in Swahili. Even songs were coined. Mzee kasema rudi mashambani hakuna kazi. Mzee kasema rudi mashambani hakuna kazi. People went back to the mashamba. They had nothing useful to do. Started again gradually coming back into the cities. But because the government believed that the order was going to be obeyed, there was no planning to respond to this rural-urban migration. People coming up and started putting up temporary shelters to live in. These shelters eventually grew up and they were now christened informal settlements. Read slums. That is how slums begin to grow in most of our urban areas. Today, as we sit here, over 60% of the population you see on the streets there in Nairobi, those who are not Kenyans, live in slums today. Those were unplanned settlements where there are no sanitation, there are no roads, there is no electricity, there's no water. In some of those sanitation habitations, the coastal say there's no toilets. There's what they call the flying toilet. The flying toilet is somebody goes, relieves himself in a newspaper, then throws it away. If you are unfortunate to be passing by, that's what greets you. So these are some of the things that we need to deal with on the continent. This is how serious the situation is. As we host the 10th special session of the African Ministerial Conference on Environment that's in Abidjan, the African Urban Forums at Addis Ababa, and the World Urban Forum in Cairo, all happening in the last part of this year, we are encouraged to focus our energy and priority on building resilience through key programs, notably financing locally led climate actions and building climate resilience of the urban poor. This will have great potential for both the rural and urban communities. Currently, cities account for about 75% of the world's energy consumption and are responsible for over 70% of the global greenhouse emissions. The way cities are planned, built, and managed is key to reducing carbon emissions and keeping global warming within the limits of 1.5 degrees Celsius as set by the Paris Agreement of 2015 on climate change. Efforts of city authorities must translate into better and sustainable urban environments that result in improved air quality, sustainable use of ecosystems, cleaner energy, reduction of overall energy consumption and greenhouse gas emission, and improved waste management. So in conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, to address the devastating impacts of climate change, we can't continue with the business as usual approach. It is important that we change the game. I strongly believe that AFDAN is the game changer. AFDAN therefore has a critical role in supporting the African Union Commission in its commitment to climate action. AFDAN is expected to be fully committed to enhancing mobilization of climate finance and enhance its access to all the 55 African countries. This will help Africa to deal with this issue seriously, because this is an issue that Africa must confront head-on if Africa hopes to develop. Africa is the richest continent on the planet Earth in as far as raw materials are concerned. Yet it is a paradox that the richest is also the poorest in as far as the living conditions of these people are concerned. This is a paradox that we can actually reverse as a people. Yes, you can, the historical reasons to justify what is there today. But we cannot live in history forever. Other countries were also colonized, for example. But they have marched on. So it's time that Africa took its destiny in its own hands and worked as one unit. If we are going to negotiate for compensation, which is our right, because Africa, for example, has got also one of the biggest carbon sinks in the world, the second largest after Amazon, the Congo forest. So Africa needs to be compensated. But if we go as Kenya, we go as DRC, Nigeria, Guinea, Senegal, Egypt, Algeria, South Africa, then we're not listening to you. They keep on taking you round and round and round. I've told you because I've told you I've been to these international conferences, these COP conferences. The resolutions are being passed. You can talk until your voice is hoarse. But after that, people pack up and go. Heads of state jump or come in on jets, land and quick there to go and make speeches. Making speeches back on the jets and go back. They wait for the next other conference next year. So the people who are just doing those conferences, they move from one conference to another conference. Each year they take 2 months or 3 months camping in those conferences. But nothing concrete comes out of them. You must make sure that something concrete comes out of those conferences. The African Union can be the champion of this. African Union should be able to speak more effectively on behalf of the rest of Africa if the African government give it the power and the mandate to do so. And that's the reason why I've offered myself to run for the position of African Union chairmanship. I hope that I will be able to use that position effectively to represent Africa, to make sure that Africa claims this century. I finished by telling you the story I would tell of an African lion. African lion, there are several African lions. In the soccer, those of you who know soccer, the Cameroonians are called the indomitable lions. The ones of Senegal are called the lions of Teranga. The ones of Morocco are called the Atlas lions. So lion is a very important animal in Africa. See, the king of the jungle. Now the African lion is challenging the Asian tiger. Tell the Asian tiger that you, Asian tiger, you've danced on the world stage alone now for too many decades. The European bear retreated to the poles, North Pole, long time ago. The American panda is also on the retreat. You have been there alone all this time. I myself have been here asleep in the Congo, the jungles of the Congo. But now I'm awake. I have the giant Congo forest, the mighty river Congo, the mighty Nile, the Niger, the Zambezi, the Limpopo, surrounded by peaks, the Kilimanjaro and Kenya to the east, the Atlas Mountains to the west. And here I'm sitting on African gold, African diamonds, African bauxite, African iron ore. And I'm going to turn all this, and African oil, I'm going to turn all this wealth, these raw materials into wealth, and claim the 20th century as truly an African century. End of the message of African land. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much for that captivating speech. Let's give him a round of applause. Thank you. Let's take our seats, please. You know, the Prime Minister's challenge us as we head to the conference of the parties in Azerbaijan a couple of days after the much-awaited US elections. We must do things different. And I know the local lion in the world of environment, the CS Aden Duale, is going to fit in the shoes of the man he mentioned in his speech, John Michuki. A short story of John Michuki. He was one of the oldest politicians in Kenya. And when he joined government, in every ministry he worked, he left an indelible mark. In the environment ministry, he is the first minister who dared to do what other ministers never did: clean up River Nairobi. And as CS Aden Duale said, he's going to clean it up and protect it. In the transport sector, he transformed it, the public transport. The order we see on the roads today is because of the late Michuki. May he rest in peace. I'm going to ask you to acknowledge the speeches in a different way. Just like our Prime Minister said, we have to do things different. First, we have to acknowledge the speech by our CS, Lands, Urban Development, Public Works and Housing. Thank you, Honorable Alice Wahome, for your very incisive speech. A clap for her. Again, the Honorable Aden Duale, for your perspicacious speech on matters of environment and what you're going to do as you lead the delegation to COP29 in Azerbaijan. A clap for him. The Honorable John Badi, the newest kid on the block. McHugh is just 2 weeks old in his docket, and he has given us a very trenchant speech. A clap for him. And of course, the Right Honorable Raila Odinga, for his sharp-witted and rapier-like speech. Very incisive and well-informed. A clap for him. Not forgetting Mr. Ali Mohammed, and I think he is our host here for elucidating to us the purpose of this conference. A clap for him. And then for well thought out introductory remarks by Mr. Peter Odeng. Makofi kwake. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to have a photo session before we break for tea. You know, we are Africans and Africa is our business. And tea is one of our core business again, here in Africa. Nairobi is called as it is. And CS reminds me, you know, Nairobi, the word Nairobi is derived from the Maasai word, Enkare Nairobi, meaning place of cool waters. You must enjoy your stay here. This is the, thank you. Okay. CS is reminding me that there will be a session for any other intervention later after tea break. Thank you. I was just saying about Kenya. As you welcome to Kenya, delegates from Nigeria, Morocco, Namibia, Togo, Uganda, Mozambique, Morocco, and every other part of the continent, know that Nairobi is a cool place. Now, I want to welcome you to a photo session, and we're going to do it in the following order. First, we are going to have our cabinet secretaries, the three of them, with the Prime Minister in the first photo here. And I invite you to stand up so that the photographers can capture you. Thank you. And then photographers, be mindful of the video cameraman behind you. Thank you. Thank you. Next, we have the PM, just as they're standing, plus the CSS, and the PS Kingdom of Eswatini, as well as Envoy Ali, Dr. Pacifica Achieng, Ambassador Beatrice Karago, Ambassador of the host country of COP29, Azerbaijan, Envoy Mohammed Nbu. Welcome for this photo. Wait for our host in the COP29. Yeah. Thank you. Then the third one. Yes, take your seats, please. Just remain standing, Honorable CSS and the PM. We have the PM, CSS, and different country representatives. We have Namibia, we have Nigeria, we have Morocco, we have Uganda. I've seen Uganda has 2 representatives, Togo, Mozambique, Ghana. Yes. Namibia, please. Representative of Namibia. Uganda. Spread on the other side, please. Thank you.
Because of the population growth that we are experiencing in our urban cities. As majority of us in this room may recall, Kenya and Brazil are co-leading the development and operationalization of BICRAP on behalf of the global community, Africa included. Indeed, a prosperous, inclusive, resilient, sustainable Africa in line with Agenda 2063 can only be achieved on the platform of long-term strategy for inclusive, resilient urban development. This included climate proving the new development vision for Africa, urbanization, and assuring that major climate vulnerabilities are adequately addressed in our planning, design, programming, leading to enhanced urban resilience. In this spirit, allow me to acknowledge the presence of all distinguished partners in this hybrid session. We are honored to have you here representing your esteemed organizations who are at the forefront of the global climate financing discourse. Your collective expertise and experience are invaluable as we seek to chart a path towards a resilient future for our urban poor. BICRAP initiative, which was launched by the government of the Republic of Kenya in collaboration with the global and regional partners, is not just a project, it is a call to action, a call to address the critical vulnerabilities faced by the urban poor. And therefore, I want to remind you participants that this initiative is expected to take off completely in all our countries. The initiative seeks to build resilience, enhance adaptive capacities, and ensure that these communities can thrive despite the challenges that we are facing due to climate change. Honorable guests, BICRAP initiative is deeply rooted in the outcomes of 2019 United Nations Climate Action Summit, where global leaders, including our own, committed to addressing climate change with urgency. Since then, we have witnessed an increasing recognition of the need for targeted action and also action and intervention that address the specific vulnerabilities that we are talking about. The African Union, and I have referred to our candidate there, during the 37th ordinary session in February 2024, further acknowledged the pivotal role of the African green climate financing. And therefore, we're seated here looking for funding, negotiating, noting what the Special Envoy has said, 1% to Africa in terms of drawing funding for climate financing is a joke. It is not, we cannot talk about adequacy, we cannot talk about inadequacy. it's more or less not there. 1% out of 100. I think we have everybody who we need in this room to deal with those figures, and it is urgent. So we need to deliberate with a serious focus to have that parameter changed as quickly as possible. And as we go to COP28, of course, it is expected that we will be able to plan together and agree on how to deal with some of those challenges. And therefore, as we gather here today, it is crucial to focus on the expected outcomes of BICLAP itself. Improving, and the objectives are that we want to improve the living conditions of the urban poor. We also want to have increased access to climate financing, and we want enhanced capacity for local governments. And finally, we want stronger regional and global partnerships built by us. Excellencies, why is this initiative so critical? The answer lies in the stark reality that climate change is already having devastating effects. Moreover, Africa contributes less than 4% of the global greenhouse gas emissions, yet it bears the brunt of climate change impact. This disparity underscores the need for greater support. BICLAP, therefore, is a direct response to these challenges. Honorable guests, the success of BICLAP in our countries, in Africa, as an initiative, hinges on strong partnerships and collaboration. We are grateful for the support so far our partners, including UN Habitat, the African Union, the Commonwealth Secretariat, UCLG Africa, and I want to confirm that we'll be hosting the regional offices here, and the government has approved the hosting, and my ministry will provide facilities to host the office. And others, we also have AFDAN, we have ARIN, and others that have been very instrumental in this work. I would like to express my deep appreciation to the government of Brazil, Turkey, Germany, and other development partners for the invaluable contributions they have given. Let me move quickly and say, as we move forward, let us remember that ultimate goal for BICLAP initiative is to build a better future for the urban poor communities. A future where they are not just surviving, but they are thriving in a climate resilient environment, leaving no one behind. The anchorage of BICLAP is therefore a flagship program for African cities within Africa Union Commission, and it's a priority area for the good of the continent. And the Right Honorable Prime Minister, we know that the plight of the urban poor population is a matter so dear to your heart, and you will be the champion for BICLAP in the pre and post campaigns for the African Union city, with a government that we fully support. As I conclude, we are looking forward to receiving all the no objection for the pilot countries to facilitate immediate submission of the BICLAP readiness project to the green climate financing for approval and execution. We are talking about implementation, and we do not have time to deliberate in terms of not making it clear that our action plans are known. We have already had several resolutions. What is needed now is call to action, complete implementation of the resolutions we have agreed, and I'm sure there will be serious resolutions here in terms of funding, in terms of the approach, in terms of the attitude. We must push our partners to open the pass. And you already know that the President of the Republic of Kenya is a champion in this area. his position on change of the architecture of financing is something that Africa must continue to engage with and push so that it happens earlier than later. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Cabinet Secretary. As the Cabinet Secretary said, 50%, the world is urbanizing very rapidly. 50% of the global community is expected to be living in urban areas. Africa is the fastest urbanizing continent, with 60% of our population by 2050 expected to be in urban centers. So building resilience for urban populations is really a very critical thing. And we thank the partnership with UN Habitat, with United Cities and local government, and all other partners. Allow me now, Your Excellency, to invite the Cabinet Secretary who is going to lead the ministerial discussions for Africa, given that Kenya is the chair of the negotiation team, and our Cabinet Secretary will be the lead minister leading the discussions on negotiations. The Honorable Cabinet Secretary for Environment, Climate Change and Forestry. You have the floor, sir.
The Right Honorable Raila Odinga, former Prime Minister of the Republic of Kenya, my colleague Honorable John Bandi from the National Treasury, Honorable Ali Sohome, our Minister for Lands, Public Works, Housing and Urban Development, the Ambassador of Azerbaijan will be our host. His government will host us in COP29. Distinguished guests, partners, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I want to begin by expressing my appreciation to my esteemed colleagues for organizing this very, very important meeting, and to the Right Honorable Raila Odinga for his presence today. His role as our candidate for the African Union chairperson and his experience as a former special envoy for infrastructure development in Africa are very invaluable and very dear to us. And because I have an opportunity